I'm a big nerd, so I've done slides. I hope that's okay. Can everybody hear me okay at the back? Up a bit, okay. I'll try and speak up a bit. My voice is a bit croaky. I'll do my best. Is that better? Can you hear me? Good. Okay. Right. So yes, I thought that I'd talk a little bit about a little piece of this book, because I can't talk about the whole book, obviously, because it's a whole book. So I decided that I'm going to focus a little bit on my particular area of interest. So this is me. I am a BACP accredited therapist. I'm not very happy with the BACP at the moment, but that's who I am. I qualified in 2004, so I've been on a very, very long journey as a therapist. And then I did an MA in trauma studies at Uni of in 2012. Became particularly interested in trauma and gender, trauma and oppression. And I've also got a history of working in domestic violence services, including women's aid. I'm particularly interested in minority stress, marginalisation, all sorts of interesting things like that. I'm trans and I'm bi, so I actually occupy two of the less heard voices within the LGBT umbrella, QIA plus umbrella. And I'm non-binary, and as Ross said, my pronouns are they, them. And if you get them wrong, I will correct you, but I will try not to snap your head off about it, because I realise it takes practice to get that right. So that's me, and yeah, as I said, trauma, minority stress, my particular interest. So I thought I would read a couple of short excerpts from the book, and also give a little bit of background to those excerpts around minority stress, because I thought it'd be probably the most interesting thing I could talk about, and I was like, what can I talk about tonight? So this is what I'm going to talk about, minority stress. Why is there a glass of water? Sam, why have you got a picture of a glass of water? Well, I once saw this demonstrated by another trainer, and I stole it, basically, because it's a great analogy. So I'm holding this bottle of water. It's not a glass, it's a bottle. It's not that hard. Even though I have fibromyalgia and my arm could get achy pretty quickly, I can hold this up and it's okay. But the longer I have to hold the glass of water, the heavier it feels. If I had to hold this for an hour, pain would be shooting up my arms. It's still the same glass of water. It's not particularly heavy, but you know, it gets harder the longer you have to hold it. And then somebody comes along and they drip one little drop of water into that glass. Oh my God, the pain is just going to be immense, just from one little drop of water. Why is that a good analogy for minority stress? Because that's kind of what happens with accumulation of microaggressions and little erasures and minute attacks and slights and all the little things that happen to all minorities every day, and women every day of their lives. So sometimes as a therapist and as a trainer, what I experience is people thinking that minorities, particularly trans people who we're talking about tonight, just don't understand why somebody reacts. Like I said earlier, if somebody calls me she, I want to be really generous and kind about it, but actually it might be quite difficult for me, because that's happened to me about 50,000 times, and the 50,000th time I do actually feel like punching someone, even though I would never want to do that. This is minority stress. If it gets out of hand, if there is a climate of microaggressions everywhere we go, it can amount to trauma. This is where trauma comes in. So for me, Person-Centredd Counselling for Trans People, the title of my book, is about actually a collective systemic issue. It's not just about the therapist and the client in the room. It's about all the relationships the client has with everybody in their lives, and how those relationships are going right or going wrong. And that contributes to our well-being or not, depending on the kind of environment that we're in. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so, and I'm drawing from the minority stress model, so just very quickly, boring, geeky slide alert. Mayer wrote the minority stress, original minority stress paper for LGBT people, didn't even include trans people. Oh, that's better. As long as everybody feels safe in the dark. So Mayer basically proposed that minority stress amounted to a kind of trauma reaction, and it came from the stigma, prejudice and discrimination from the hostile environment that gay people were under. And there were various things feeding into that: prejudice, expectations of rejection, hiding and concealing, internalised homophobia, and all the kind of coping processes we use to deal with all of those things. So the minority stress model is taken off and it's now applicable in all sorts of places, but Mayer came up with it originally. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit from the book. I think I can see. No, it's fine, I can see fine. Okay, so yeah, so in this chapter, I give a whole lot of really depressing statistics on hate crime, mental health and discrimination against trans people. I'm not going to read those statistics out to you today, but they're pretty alarming stuff. There's some really serious rises in hate crime against trans people. There's some pretty serious mental health risks to trans people, which have been found in studies to be entirely due to the way trans people are treated in society. So there's a big systemic issue of discrimination against trans people. I just want to give a trigger warning. I am going to be mentioning some difficult stuff. If you need to leave because this is uncomfortable to hear, please look after yourselves. And I apologise in advance for reading some really heavy, difficult things, but it's kind of important. Right. So, even if severe abuse and hate crime are absent, trans people can still face a daily attack on their identity that can be traumatising over time. Many trans people experience complex post-traumatic stress symptoms and will be continually re-traumatised over and over by small and large incidents of discrimination in their daily lives. As stated before, it is much like being in an abusive relationship, only the relationship is with multiple people. Trans people are more likely to be assaulted, but also more likely to be shunned, disbelieved, infantilised, have their experiences and emotions disregarded, and be constantly put down. Often abuse victims are viewed as the problem or oversensitive or not being positive enough, and this can compound the sense of isolation. When trans people speak about their experiences, they rarely receive genuine empathy, respect and listening in return. The relational values of the person-centred approach are crucial to helping a trans person recover their well-being. One of the worst parts of experiencing negative attitudes from so many people is that it becomes hard not to internalise these attitudes, particularly if they come from people close to you. The abused person will, almost inevitably, blame themselves to achieve a sense of control they do not have. If anti-trans attitudes seem to be all around, particularly from family, even more reason to self-blame. As Fairbairn says, it's better to be a sinner in a world ruled by God than to live in a world ruled by the devil. Hierarchical systems assert themselves by working to maintain everybody's place. Person-centred counsellors are committed to anti-hierarchical practice, but if we do not notice the hierarchy is there, how will we challenge it? Some people will only accept a trans person who is passive, grateful for any kindnesses they choose or not to bestow. If a trans person expresses anger at the injustices in the community faces, they may be met with patronising voices telling them they are misbehaving. Because of the powerful narrative that trans people are so hard to love and accept, people can be left thinking that even a small amount of kindness or accommodation is an extraordinary effort. Just going to let these two in. I think, are there any seats in the back? One seat there. Where was that? Two seats. When a trans person... When a trans person says that's not enough, they're likely to be met with resentment from the person who has already exerted themselves more than they care to. Without healthy anger motivating us, we cannot shift social norms. Hence, Pride is an event that commemorates a riot, and suffragettes did things that were thoroughly disapproved of at the time. That's an euphemism, isn't it? But like Bill Bonds and shit. But shifts will inevitably feel uncomfortable for people who do not see why things must change. It is easy to become the good trans person who is not like other trans people and never makes a fuss. Those statistics in the last section, that's why things need to change and a fuss is called for. When I worked as a school counsellor, I used to often hear two responses to bullying, neither of which is any use whatsoever. One was stand up for yourself, and the other was just ignore them. Social groups choose their victims carefully and not at random. Bullying is a way to further establish yourself in the social hierarchy, often enacted by people who are themselves insecure, albeit more powerful than their targets. People who can be marginalised are chosen as the targets. Who gets marginalised is an ever-shifting thing. What we should tell anyone who is being bullied is seek support from other people, because it's our connection to the other people that will both deter the bullies and help mitigate their impact on us psychologically. However, when society has you pegged as a scapegoat, seeking support is no easy task. Constant, humiliating, unjust betrayal is what scapegoats get used to. Other humans are simply less trustworthy than they are towards people who are more socially supported. This is because it feels socially unsafe to show support for scapegoats. So people will look hard for reasons not to have to. One trans person committed a crime? Good, that means we can stop supporting all trans people. Sadly, targets of bullies are just as susceptible to acting as bystanders or bullies towards other marginalised people, instead of building solidarity with them, in the hopes of a reprieve from being targeted themselves. So you can probably tell I'm really into the idea that person-centred counselling is actually bigger than just the two people in the room, and that there's a whole system that needs to be addressed and a whole system of hierarchies that need to be looked at. So I go on to talk about the web model, which is just my kind of way of conceptualising stuff that we talk about as activists a lot. Privilege, structural hierarchy, etc., etc. I'm not sure how well you can see that slide. I will just talk you through it anyway, very quickly. So I kind of took this idea of minority stress and started to think about it relationally as a counsellor. Obviously, I think in terms of relationships. I think about the fact that, we talk about attachment theory and we talk about parental support, but actually attachment theory is often about attachment to community and all the interconnections we have with other people. Minorities often have tenuous connections sort of foisted upon them by various things within the social environment, and these can slowly break down their relationships with other people and their sense of support, and that affects their psychological well-being. So going round the thing, poor housing and homelessness can fracture our relationships with other people's services, adding to our stress. So going to the police and not feeling like you're going to get a fair hearing, or going to a service and knowing that you're going to be misgendered or not understood or told that you're too complex. You're more likely to experience harassment, you're more likely to experience health inequalities, poverty, you're more likely to experience demonising in the media. It's a huge problem at the moment. There seems to be a systemic effort from certain newspapers to demonise trans people, and there's a campaign of misinformation which is really getting quite alarming. Higher levels of violence and hate crime, issues dismissed as culture, so that people don't actually dig down into what's really going on. So thinking about like drug use in the LGBT community being one of those things, social isolation and all kinds of discrimination. So the opposite of that is what some people call privilege, and I like to think of as hidden support. The hidden support we get just for being us, where relationships and interactions with other people go easier just because of the group that we belong to. So I'll give you an example. As a white, middle-class person, when I walk around a shop, I'm not followed around by the security guards. I might be if I was homeless or if I was black, and that would be a more difficult social interaction because of the group that I belong to. So that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. And of course for trans people there are many ways in which we don't get this hidden support that other people do. Studies show that successful people are successful not because of individual efforts, but because of the amount of support they get by the rest of society. So support is absolutely crucial to our well-being and success. Okay, final reading, and then we're going to be done. I'm getting to that age where I have to put my glasses on the end of my nose to read, sorry about this. When we look at minority stress, the ideas of therapy as a one-to-one individualistic endeavour break down. Although our one relationship, if we weave it well enough, may be truly transformative in the context of a potentially barren landscape, what our clients really need is to be held in a much better social web. I'm a trainer as well as a therapist because of this. I know that training a few hundred people to build better relationships for the trans community is going to weave hundreds and hundreds of threads that will hold many trans individuals more securely. As a therapist, it feels equally important to attend to the web that is holding, or in some cases precariously dangling, our clients. Sometimes this is about encouraging the client to help to build relationships with other trans people. We may need to help break down the internalised trans prejudice that might be blocking them from building those relationships. Internalised trans prejudice can also prevent those relationships from feeling as affirming as relationships with cis people. It's important to help them find a space for trans people like them, though, because just like the rest of the world, trans spaces are not always perfectly inclusive. The support of non-LGBT people, especially family, will be much more effective than support from within the LGBT plus community, and that's backed up by research. It's not hard to understand why, because if we hold within ourselves the same biases that the rest of society has, the acceptance of other LGBT plus people is not going to be as validating as acceptance from people who are themselves more socially accepted. That's not to say that minority community solidarity is not invaluable, if not essential, but a client may need to help learn to value that support, to see the potential happiness in having trans friends and trans lovers. Depending on the general level of awareness within a community group, trans people may find themselves marginalised even within trans spaces, as everywhere else. Racism, intersex erasure, bisexual erasure, antagonism towards non-binary people, sexism, ableism, classism, to name but a few, exists. It's too easy for us to fail to bear the weight of all these rejections and broken threads alongside our clients. While we may want to support our clients to mend the threads that they want to mend, there's no benefit to our clients in us maintaining that an irretrievably broken thread is mendable. We may feel the urge to encourage a client to suppress themselves to maintain a relationship. But really, when we're asking them to maintain a relationship based on a fiction, then we may feel like the other party is having a relationship with someone else. It's a broken thread in denial that it's broken. The urge to tell a client that their parents may come around when in fact they may not, may originate in our own need to believe that people are not that terrified of having a trans person in the family, but sometimes they really are. Some families are accepting from the first moment, some come around after time, some never do. The urge to encourage a client to make nice in the face of mistreatment is encouraging a submission in exchange for a relationship that is conditional. Naturally, the client will, by necessity, be doing their fair share of submitting, suppressing and bargaining, but we need to resist our urges to subtly encourage this at the expense of their growth. What we can do is support a client to notice and build contact with allies where they can be found and seek them out where they seem absent. We can also act as advocates where appropriate, assisting clients with GP referrals and introductions to appropriate services where a word from us might help build a bridge to them being listened to. We can point family towards trans affirmative support services like Gyres and Mermaids and Distinction. Those of us that feel able to offer activities within our sessions might find the where's my support activity useful. In fact, this is something you can do at home, honestly, it's great. On a piece of paper, we draw concentric circles or simply place a marker in the centre to represent the client. And then they use buttons or pebbles or other items to mark out their support network. Services, spaces, family, friends, online groups and forums, any human contact that is relational and at least partly helpful. Once mapped out, the client has a chance to think, do any of these people need to be moved closer? Do any need to be further away? Off the page entirely? Are there any vacancies? What for? Cuddles? Chit-chat? Venting? Sport and recreation? Challenge? Acceptance? Advice? Mentoring? Volunteering? Often, by visualising more precisely what we are missing, we can locate it. So the web model that I was talking about earlier pays close attention to the network of relationships that holds each of us. It draws our attention towards the people for whom those networks are tenuous. It encourages us to actively attend to those threads for the strengthening of social cohesion in general. I hope any person-centred counsellor, in fact all counsellors, knows in their heart that hierarchical relationships are not that relational at all. They tend to be more instrumental. If we're over-attending to our security within a hierarchy, we are neglecting the webs of social cohesion that we could be spinning laterally. Hierarchies will have us all feeling insecure and dangling by a thread. When we spin lateral threads, they are mutually holding. As we know from the enormous fulfillment we gain from our work, the relationships we build in the therapy room are mutual. And each of our clients, however isolated and outside of society they seem, has the capacity not just to be held, but to be holding someone in return. Would you like to come in? Okay, that's it. Any questions?
Yes, does the person-centered approach take a lot more time from the therapist, time investment on the therapist's part? Because I'm worrying how that will fit with the fast food therapy of the NHS. If like only the private sector will get it, and then the most needy won't get it. That's my kind of concern, really.
It is a concern. I mean, it's a concern. Somebody one day decided that because the average number of sessions clients needed was 6 sessions, that therefore all clients could get through therapy in 6 sessions, and it's nonsense. As somebody who's worked a lot in my career in brief counselling, I'd say that it absolutely is possible to do person-centred therapy in a brief and focused way.